Hi everyone, welcome to another Office Hours, and I am Nicole van der Hoeven.
And I am Sime.
And today it's just the two of us. Just the two. Anyway, I don't want to sing live. But today we wanted to first discuss some announcements that we've got. First, I know that we mentioned it last week already, but if you are using K6 and CI/CD pipelines, you may be affected by a change that we made recently. Because Bintray was sunsetted, you may have to update your URLs. Here's the link to more details on that.
Yeah, and
there it is.
There it is. And for most of you, or the ones of you that use Mac OS or Windows, you don't have to do anything. It will just continue to work as it did previously. But for Linux users, and especially those that use either the Yum package manager or the apt package manager, you will have to change the mirrors you use to download your K6 binaries. But it's an easy fix, and there's a cut and paste scripts available in the link. And
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, the second announcement that we have is that we've just launched the new K6 extension portal, or ecosystem portal. So in case you want to have a look at what extensions are available for use with XK6 and maybe try them out or see what they do, just explore the ecosystem a bit. We've now created a nifty little portal for you to do that, as well as a cool bundle builder that you can use to put together your own bespoke K6 binary. So if you navigate to the docs, just as previously, you'll have a lot of tabs in the top or different sections. If you go to the ecosystem tab, you'll see the new ecosystem pages. And here you have a list of all the extensions that are currently available for XK6. And if you click one of them, you'll go to their GitHub page and you will be able to see their README, how to use it, and so on. And if you want to add your own extension to this list, maybe you've created something that you want to share with the community, then you can just click the add your own extension link at the top, and you'll be taken directly to the appropriate file in the docs repo, where you can just make a pull request adding your own extension. And there are also some guidelines for what you need to do to be accepted. I'll zoom in a bit so it's actually visible as well.
By the way, don't you love the new dark mode now?
I do. But now it seems to have changed to the actual dark mode. My favorite is the dusk mode, I think it's called. The dark but not so dark variation that they introduced a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, I definitely love it. So you'll also be able to read the guide about how to create your own XK6 extension written by Ivan. So that's available from the extension pages as well. And last but not least, it also includes the bundle builder, where you'll be able to pick whatever extensions you want, like this, and then you can just copy the command you need to run to make those, to include those into your bespoke K6 binary. So that's about it. I just wanted to give you a quick look at that so you know where to find it. And we're really excited to see whatever you might think of that K6 could do that we've not thought of. So we know, for instance, that there has been attempts at creating Minecraft load testing clients and things like that. So really the sky is the limit, and you'll have the option to extend both outputs and the actual JavaScript API. So let us know whatever you're up to with the XK6 support and the new ecosystem pages. Yeah, that was it.
Do you want to talk about the CircleCI one too?
Sure. I'll just go ahead
Since
and
you did
share my
that.
screen as well. Again, I mean, so starting this month, we actually have a official partner K6 orb available for CircleCI users. So in case you want to add K6 tests or integrate them into your existing CircleCI pipelines, that is just as easy as including the orb and setting up a job where you specify whether you want to run it in the cloud or not, what test to run, and if you're going to run it in the cloud, you also include a token for your K6 Cloud account. We have a couple of usage examples on the page, so feel free to try that out as well. It's still a very early release, so there might be bugs, and if there are, make sure to report those in the GitHub repo, which is available at K6IO CircleCI orb. So in case you have any issues, just report them here and I'll have a look as soon as possible.
Great. So today, I don't know if you've noticed that I'm wearing something different today. It's not completely random. It's
I noticed
actually
your new
really
look.
appropriate. Yeah, do you like it?
Yeah,
I
definitely.
wear it every day now. Except the thing is, it's actually for children, so it's a little tight on my head. I mean, it's like they think that adults don't want to wear these kinds of things. It's really silly. But it's not completely random. Today is actually the launch day of a Pokemon game, which I've already pre-purchased and pre-downloaded. It's on the Nintendo Switch. So it's not an ad, but it's new Pokemon Snap. And I've already even played a little bit. I know I just have a soft spot in my heart for Pokemon. But there's actually something that's related to it that I do want to talk about here, and that's a talk that I somehow managed to get into. What the real reason is that Sime was supposed to do the talk, but it's his birthday, so he begged off, and then somehow I wound up saying yes to it. But the problem was that it's about chaos engineering. That's not something that I mean, other than not being an expert in it, I was a complete beginner just a few months ago. I had never even run any chaos experiment. So it was a little bit of an undertaking. I do think, though, that chaos engineering is really important to learn, even for a tester, even if you're not the one that might be deploying the application. Those things are really important to learn, and especially because chaos engineering uses a lot of that knowledge. So I think personally that chaos engineering is just another type of testing with a slightly different attitude. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think so as well. It's basically the same idea as regular testing, but using a somewhat more scientific approach rather than the maybe classical testing approach.
So I came up with this idea for this whole talk that I want to discuss a bit about the premise of that talk today. It's called Schrodinger's Pokemon. The title, I'll explain that in the talk, but the reason that it's Pokemon themed is just because the application that I'm going to be running tests on, or that I did run tests on, was a Pokemon themed one. So Sime has been helping me a lot with it, because I think that for testers, especially, wading into the waters of chaos engineering is really a daunting task. I felt like there's just so much that I needed to learn, and I didn't really know how to go about learning it. So of course I'm very lucky because I had Sima here to talk to, and another person from the K6 team, Danielle Gonzalez Lopez. And I really, after that, I just watched YouTube presentations. There are a lot of experts in this field, and they've put their talks and different conferences online for free for people to watch. Tammy Bryant, especially, I watched a few of her videos because I thought she explained things really well. Anna Medina as well. I even attended the Gremlin boot camp. So Gremlin is a chaos engineering tool that I didn't end up using for this one, but I still recommend it. It's a very user-friendly way to get started with Gremlin for any testers out there that want to see what it's about. And then Simi also recommended this book called Chaos Engineering by Nora Jones. Oh, do you have it there? Yeah,
book.
wow. That was even unplanned.
Yeah, by Casey Rosenthal and Nora Jones. It's a great introduction to chaos engineering, definitely.
Okay, so maybe I will share my screen and show you the application first. Well, this is not my application, but this is the application that I deployed. It's on GitHub as well. It's called Poké API. And what it does is it just lets you query a database for different Pokemons, different abilities. So let me just demonstrate how it works. Maybe I'll make the screen a bit bigger. Let's type in my Pokemon Sword and Shield starter. I did Shield and it was Grookey. So you just send that request and it sends you a lot of information about the forms, the evolutions. It has pictures and even moves. So it's way more information than probably anyone would need. But I thought it was interesting because I'm a huge fan of the Pokemon franchise. I didn't actually have to buy this just for the presentation. So that gives you an indication of how much of a fan I am, even without it. So
one
I think,
question.
yes.
Do this API also include information about berries in Pokemon? For instance, their firmness?
That's a very leading question. What was it again? Berry? Was it like this? I can't even remember. Do you remember?
I think so.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Maybe not.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the exact thing was. But
Sorry for
yes,
interrupting you.
it does have lots of items, including berries and their firmness, which Sim and I got a kick out of. But one of the first challenges, I think, with getting me started on chaos engineering was deploying this app. So, Sima, do you think my experience was typical?
No, I wouldn't say it was actually, because one thing to keep in mind when you do this sort of exercises is whether or not the application that you're going to use or that you'll use as your demo application is actually suitable for containerizing, or even worse, I say in this case, if it's suitable for putting into Kubernetes. And in this case, it was indeed very much Docker compliant or Docker friendly, but not that Kubernetes friendly. I'll let you describe it more in detail, but no, I wouldn't say your experience was typical.
Yeah, so I found it on GitHub and I thought that it would be really easy to deploy because there was already a Docker Compose file, and I didn't really understand the difference or what would be entailed, what I would have to do in order to get it from the Docker Compose file to a Kubernetes manifest file. Sim helped me a lot in this part. I mean, we literally had like hours long conversations over a few days trying to figure it out. I am a little bit, I feel little bit validated in that he didn't just take a look at it and be like, oh yeah, that's so easy. This is what you have to do. It was, it was a pain.
Actually,
But
I think I did. I was like, oh, this was really easy. Let's just do this and this. And then that turned out to not work. So then we just had to rabbit hole it from there.
yeah. I will actually share my GitHub repo because now that it's converted, if anyone wants to try this, there it is. Because the manifest files that we ended up running with are there. So Kubernetes was a big concern. I didn't even really. I think I knew of it. I knew in general terms what it did, but I had never created my own Kubernetes cluster. So there were also a lot of conversations between me and Sima about how to create a cluster for reliability, like with reliability in mind. Do you want to talk about some things that you suggested?
Oh, let me see if I can remember them. Because one thing that really sets Kubernetes apart from Docker, for instance, that you kind of have to get your mind around before you can really start to understand how Kubernetes works, is that it's not really a container solution in the sense that Docker is. Kubernetes, I usually refer to, and I think I did the last office hours as well, to an article I read where they describe Kubernetes more as an operating system, where you schedule different kind of jobs, and the operating system or Kubernetes will try to find out when to run that and where. So when you try to use Kubernetes with reliability in mind, you really have to think about things like, okay, how many nodes do I need for this to be available, even in case of a failure, or how many pods do I need of each resource to make them redundant in case of failures, and what happens if my node where I actually run my ingresses, if that node dies, will I still be able to access my pod that is running on my other node, or will that just terminate due to the ingress being unavailable? So there are a lot of different considerations that you need to take into account when you set up your cluster. And fortunately, you opted for the managed version of Kubernetes. I usually run it bare metal, but since you used a managed version of it, you didn't have to think about things like how many nodes to have in your control plane, and how you would manage that, or how you would assign IP addresses or things like that, because that was mostly taken care of for you, which is really nice, at least if you're starting out with Kubernetes.
Yeah, it really helped that I did it on DigitalOcean, which I find to be just the most user-friendly interface, really. It's cheap enough for just experimentation purposes, which is what this was. So that was definitely a help. Let me share my screen again. The first thing that I did was after the application was up, I ran a baseline test. And this is something that I'm used to doing for load testing in general, but in chaos engineering, this is called defining a steady state. And the idea is that you're supposed to come up with how you're supposed to get an idea for how your application behaves normally before you start injecting load and chaos and making and changing a lot of variables. So this is like the before state, like the control group. So I did that by running a lot of tests. This is the project on K6 Cloud that I used. And this star here means that this is the one that I decided was my baseline. Now, I ran this with 60 virtual users. My problem here is, and I wish that I had had time to flesh this out, the response time is already 10 seconds. And I think that already says a lot about how not optimized for performance this application is, or my setup is. What do you think, Sime?
Yeah, definitely.
Do you think if this were a production application, I think that when defining the steady state, we should really get this to lower than 10 seconds, don't you think?
Yes. I usually start out at somewhere around 300 and 400 milliseconds as a starting point for the average, and then try to work my way downwards. 10 seconds is not really acceptable for, at least not for a, uh, an API that just serves static data, as in this case.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, definitely. In this case, though, since I really just wanted to know how to do it, I just went on from here rather than spending a lot of time to tweak it. I really just wanted to get to running the experiments right away, so I know how to apply it in a more realistic situation. So I came up with three hypotheses. In chaos, chaos engineering says that after you have a steady state, you can then identify these variables that you want to introduce to your application. So the first one that I wanted to check out was load, because that's easy and I thought it would be a good place to start. I actually used this like list of test runs, the test overview screen on K6 as a bit of a test execution log, because it's just so handy to see like what did I try and when was that and what was the response time. Then I also put in some notes on it too. So the first thing that I did was 100 users. So it was this one. And I found it. So this one was, I put notes here. So this was RO5. Let me just show you if I go to, let's start with a baseline first. And I also found it useful to compare the baseline to the particular run. That was this one, 100 virtual users. So the baseline is on top and the 100 user test was the bottom. I had a threshold here set up for the failed rate, and you can see that I said that this had failed because the number of requests was way higher. Although I'm kind of surprised. Let me just see if I'm looking at the right test here. It was 100 virtual users. Yeah. Oh, I don't think I had the right test selected. Let me just go back to that. So baseline, and then comparing the results. I think I selected the wrong one earlier.
okay, so just
Why is
a
it not
question
showing?
from me that are watching. You selected a test that was sort of it had a star icon next to it. Does that mean that it's a baseline, or did you put it in your favorites, or what does that icon indicate?
Yeah, so it's a baseline. You can go to any test and then you can go over here and set it as the baseline. It's really just a visual indicator so that when you're looking at a long list of tests here, that you can identify right away which one your
Hmm.
baseline is.
Okay.
That's really what it was.
Hmm.
So I tried 100 and 200 virtual users, and that failed pretty catastrophically. The error rate here was pretty high. So threshold rate was way higher. I said 5%. That was what I considered to be okay. And because of how the script was, I have a data file in the script. Actually, maybe I can show you the script too. So here, so I'm querying the database for a Pokemon, and the name of the Pokemon is taken from a CSV file. So there were some Pokemons in there that I didn't that aren't yet in the database. I think some of the newer ones, and then. So what I was saying was that there's a certain amount of error rate that I thought was to be expected just because of how the script was and how the database didn't have all the Pokemon. But this is like really excessive. I mean, look at this. This is what, 50% of the requests failed. So it's kind of really easy to mark this experiment as failed. Usually I would imagine it's not so dramatic just from load. So definitely isn't viable at 100 virtual users. Okay. Then the next one that I wanted to do was chaos. I wanted to introduce the chaos. And in this case, what I decided to do was to use Simis extension. Maybe you want to talk about it, Simi.
Yeah, I can just mention it quickly. I think we've talked about it here as well previously, but we have a XK6 extension that you can find in the new ecosystem pages called XK6 Chaos that basically lets you interact with Kubernetes clusters and do some fault injection on your cluster. So for instance, which I think is what you've used, Nicole, you can list your pods that are available in a certain namespace, and you can choose to maybe terminate one of them in case you want to test how your service recovers from that. And I definitely want more feedback from whoever is using this, because there seems to be a couple of users on what they would like to see. Yeah, going forward, because I want to evolve this into something more, but I need your feedback on what you'd like to see in the tool to be able to make it relevant for you. So feel free to give me any feedback you have, either on Slack or on Twitter.
So I think I've already told you one of the things that I would have wanted to see. Right now, XK6 Chaos just does one thing, which is killing a pod. I'd love to see that extended to other experiments, like latency, or the black hole thing that Gremlin does is pretty cool. And then maybe artificially inflating CPU and memory, that would be interesting as well.
That's great. I'm definitely adding them to the roadmap.
So in this case, one of the concerns for me for chaos experiments against an application is that when you're just concerned about the load that you're injecting, or in this case the faults, or the pod termination, it's hard to see what's happening in the application. So it's really important that before you start any of this, that you have some sort of monitoring solution or an observability platform that you're using. I ended up using New Relic, but there are lots of tools that you could use as well. What would you typically use, Simon?
I would probably go with New Relic as well, just because I finally started to grow accustomed to that. But if you want to use something that's open source or available for free, you can definitely use Grafana or any of the other open source stacks that are available as well. But New Relic works, Datadog works as well. I don't know about. I think you can do it with Azure's equivalent as well. So there are definitely a lot of options to choose from. But New Relic is good, definitely.
And the same thing goes for K6 Cloud here. I use it because obviously I get it for free, but you don't have to. I just found it really useful to be able to compare. That was the main thing that I used it for. Like, you can see, that right away that this one had a threshold that passed and this one had one that failed. Things like that are so handy in this one view, it really tells the story. And I let me show you how I did it with New Relic. This is all in the GitHub repo too, so if you want to go and download that, just so you don't have to redo a lot of the work that I did already. That I did have to create this New Relic helper file. I basically just wanted to identify some metrics that I definitely wanted to pass on to New Relic. And then I just import it in the script here. I didn't put my API key, but this is where you would put the API key. The way that I'm connecting, that I'm integrating K6 to New Relic here is through the statsd integration. So you want to talk about that, Sima? I don't know if you were involved in that.
No, not too much actually, but statsd, as some of you probably know already, is some kind of standard for sending metrics or sending stats, basically, through a daemon or a distributed service agent, what have you, and then pushing that forward to some other vendor or some other tool that you want to use to visualize this. In this case, New Relic provides their own agent that you can use for this, that you'll send your that you'll use as your output for K6. So you'll send your data or your metrics to that agent that you have running in your cluster, and those metrics will then be forwarded by that agent into your New Relic account. And there are multiple different flavors of this. The one that is usually called just statsd is one that was invented or popularized by Etsy, while New Relic has their own standard, which is called statsd version 2, and then there's the Datadog standard. And those are fairly equivalent. There are not too much differences between them. But there is no clear standard that works for everyone. At least none that is agreed. So you might have varying amount of success based on which APM provider or what agent you use, but you should be able to at least try it out.
Great. So what I did here was I had one scenario for the actual test, and this is the only one that was enabled for the load test that I tried. And then I added this other scenario here. By the way, I love this feature. This is one of the things that I think every load testing tool should have, and it's being able to have multiple scenarios, different user flows. In this case, I have my main one, which is the load test, and for the first 15 minutes, it ramps up. Okay, right now it's at 40, but I think the baseline that I selected was at 60 users. And then it maintains that as a steady state for 45 minutes, and then it ramps down gracefully for 60 seconds. I found that the ramp up was particularly necessary because even with the 60 users, when I just started with a full 60 without a ramp up of some sort, I got very different results. Mm-hmm. So it's probably more realistic to have some sort of ramp up. It's not often that you get 60 users all coordinating and they're not like 1, 2, 3, click, So this is definitely a more realistic way to do it with the stages. I called it catch 'em all.
I guess doing it without the ramp up would be good, for instance, for testing if you are susceptible to DDoS attacks and that sort of thing, where you might actually coordinate a lot of requests that are happening simultaneously. But as you say, for most usual use cases that don't concern themselves with that, it's not really gonna happen, or it's not that natural, unless it's Black Friday and you want to test what happens exactly at 12 or midnight when your prizes go live.
Yeah, or for those like horse racing or something where it's like there is a certain start time where things happen. But mainly for general use cases, it's a pretty good idea to think about using stages. So that was the main. There were 60 users for this main load test, and then I just added one user that's just going to be the agent of chaos, which in the Pokemon franchise would be Team Rocket. And what this is saying is that one user will be started, and that happens 30 minutes into the test. So my ramp up was 15 minutes. So by this point, it should have already been in the steady state. So it should be really easy to see, ideally, in the logs, what the effect is of this pod being terminated. So for my my experiment here, I did two of them where I was killing a pod 30 minutes in. One was for an app pod, and the other one was the web pod, and there were differences in that as well. This is the threshold that I showed you in K6 Cloud earlier. I put this so that I would easily see whether the error rate had increased beyond 5%. And then this format of scenarios also specifies which function to call. So that's just those two, this one here, and let me just show you. Whoops. Okay, this is the kill pod function. And this just goes and fetches the pods that are available, and then it randomly selects one according to a certain criterion, which I put here. I wanted the pod to start with web, so you would change that depending on what you wanted. In my case, I mean, you could just have it to randomly choose it, but I wanted to target the exact replicas that I wanted to terminate. So then it just outputs that to the console, and it kills it. So let's see what that looks like. Go back again here. See, it's so handy to see, like, oh, in this one I just killed the web. I want to see the app. Yeah, kill one app pod after 30 minutes.
Do you remember in which version we introduced the HTTP rec failure metric that you're using?
I think it was 30.
Mm-hmm. It was quite recently, so you might not have it.
Or was it 29? I'm not sure.
No, I think it might have been 30 or even later.
Okay.
But just to make sure, if you don't get this to work, you're trying Nicole's example and don't get it to work, make sure you're on the latest K6 version, just to make sure that you're not running into errors because you're running a too old version. Just wanted to mention that for.
Yeah, good point. So this experiment turned out well because you can barely even see when it happened. It just seemed to recover really quickly. So I was able to see this in Relic. Sime, you said that you had some suspicions as to why it didn't seem to affect the application so much.
Did I?
Well,
maybe I
because
did.
if we look at the web one, it's so different. Here, let me show you. This like clearly failed.
Yeah, now I remember. Yeah, since the API is actually in your internal virtual network, I have some kind of suspicion that since it's using selectors only or services, and not ingresses to resolve what node to forward the request to, I think that is a lot faster than if you, for instance, are going directly through the ingress. So the web is probably more susceptible to failures, or it takes a little bit longer for that to recover than any internal resources that are directly querying your core DNS that you have deployed in your cluster.
Okay, I guess that makes sense. I probably, yeah, that's something that I didn't really quite understand, why the app one you could barely see the difference. But here, even just looking at the graph, right? It's like something definitely happened here. So the response time even plummeted, probably because there was nothing that was going on at that time. And it was probably returning error rates, which had a lower response time. But yeah, there was a jump there. And let's see what time this was. 1:20. Yeah, so it was this one. So I'm looking at New Relic now. That's it here. That's the CPU. Oh, and one of the benefits of having K6 sending the metrics to New Relic is that you can also see it here from one place if you didn't want to keep going back and forth between New Relic and K6 Cloud. And yeah, the non-HTTP 200 responses were also increasing throughout that test. I even got the cluster data here. So New Relic is really good for that, for showing all of these things. There were also some restarts here that I was kind of surprised to see. And it wasn't just the web one. These are things that I wish that I'd been able to really look into.
Yeah, and in a production cluster or in a real world scenario, you would probably react to that and as you say, get to the bottom of it. But when you do this kind of contained demo, you don't always have time to do that, right? So you have to draw a line somewhere between what you look at and what you just let pass for the sake of time. But I just want to point out that I really think that the New Relic pages that you showed here, they are really nice, because they let you easily correlate data between different metrics or different SLIs that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And when you sort of put your mouse anywhere in the time series or in the diagram, you also get that exact same marking on all the other diagrams as well, which really helps with seeing what's going on um, at the same time in different aspects of your application. And as you say, you can have your load test, you can have your request rates and the cluster available at the same page, and just see, as you hover the timeline, what happened to each of those aspects at any given time. So I really think this is golden to be able to really pinpoint and narrow down what's wrong in your cluster or with your
Yeah.
service.
I was surprised that the CPU utilization here is pretty high throughout the entire test. I kind of expected that there would be some sort of jump here.
That kind of depends, because if I remember correctly, did we put any requests or any limits regarding CPU and memory for your pods?
No, and that's one of the things that I did write down. Danielle from the K6 team also mentioned this, that something they could have done better was rather than just looking at the CPU of the node, I could have also done health checks and set health limits, resource limits for the pods themselves. So right now, I didn't have that, so I don't know. I don't really have visibility into that. But that's definitely something that I could do in the future.
Yeah, and one suggestion there, or a sort of a tip and trick, if you don't have a Danielle available that you can ask for these sorts of recommendations, there is actually a tool by the great folks that also do the chaos toolkit called Reliably, and at least right
Do you want to
now,
share your screen, sorry?
yeah, sure. At least right now, from what I've been able to tell, it's free to use, so you should definitely try it out and see if you like it at least. Uh,
So what does it actually do?
it
Oh, this is the
actually
one you're telling me that tells you what is wrong with the way you've configured it, right?
Exactly. So you'll be able to just run it against your Kubernetes cluster, for instance, and it will tell you uh, any mistakes or issues you might have in your manifests or in your cluster state that you probably should correct to be able to get a
Mm-hmm.
reliable and performant environment. So um, I actually ran these on my own home cluster that I've been toying with, and that cluster is definitely not best according to best practices. So when I ran reliably on my cluster, I got a list of like 70 different things that I could do do differently, and they're
Like,
not
what did
all
they suggest?
like putting resource limits and things like that.
Mm.
But or replicating your services across nodes. But given that it's a home lab, I have one node, and I don't really use that CPU intensive applications. I just opted out of that when I set it up. But if you want to really, trim in your Kubernetes cluster, that could be a tool to use. There are probably other tools that do the same thing, but I really like this one, and I like the peeps at Reliably as well, and what they're doing with the Chaos toolkit. So feel free to give it a try.
Okay, maybe we can also talk about. Okay, so like to wrap up, I did the 3 experiments. One was a load test, which passed. Oh, sorry, which failed. And then I did the pod termination for the app pod, which passed. And then that was the only one that passed. And the third one was the pod termination of the web pod, and that failed as well. How would you do it if you were going to continue with this and this was a real application that you wanted to deploy? What would your next steps be?
My next steps would be to probably to check the logs of whatever services you are running. In this case, you have the app and you have the web. So it's really interesting to see whether you can see anything in the web's logs that would give you some kind of indication of what is wrong, right? And after that, I would probably consider something like, okay, is it actually my service that is causing this, or my ingress, or where is the actual issue? And can I in any way scale that out to make sure I don't have any single point of failure? And then, given that the app didn't really contribute with any downtime or any errors in your test, I probably wouldn't have put that much time into troubleshooting that. But if I were to troubleshoot that, I would probably experiment with things like, okay, so if my API goes down, can I maybe have some kind of circuit break here that would stop serving requests against the API until it's stable again, and maybe serve static data from a file on an S3 bucket or something similar. So there are different considerations you can do, but it's in general pretty hard to say what to do, or to give any generic advice, right?
Yeah.
Because it all depends on the application, and you really have to study the data that you get and see what is happening, and try to take action out of that. Uh, but
Yeah, I also didn't touch the database at all. That's something that I think I should at least run an experiment on, because I don't know what will happen if, well, firstly, I only had one instance of the database pod, right? So it would have been nice to have a replica of that with the anti-affinity setup, so that there would be one on each node rather than 2 on the same one. And then the cache too, the Redis cache, I didn't touch that at all. Those could be good contenders for shutting those down. But there are also other chaos experiments that I really wanted to get into, like artificially inducing high CPU or memory and memory utilization. That was next on my list, and I still will get to that. But I think that's so good too. I that could have given me a lot of insights, especially
Definitely.
if I had had the health checks and the resource limits set up.
And just to give you some kind of actionable advice, I guess, because you were running traffic as your load balancer, right? If I'm not completely mistaken, that was what was running in your cluster. I think, let's at least assume it was. And I think most load balancers have this. Maybe not the built into Kubernetes, but if you're running any of the additional load balancers, you probably can do this. And what I would do in that case is to actually add some kind of retry logic in the load balancer. So for instance, if you have an issue with a backend or a pod that you want to serve a response from, if you try that backend and it doesn't respond, or responds with bogus data or whatever, if it's malfunctioning, you could actually set Kubernetes up to retry that a couple of attempts, and also put some kind of interval with a back-off behavior, so that if it's not working on the first attempt, wait for 20 milliseconds, try
Yeah.
again. If it's still not working, wait for 40 milliseconds, try again. So instead of getting a error in the user end, you would actually just have a somewhat longer response time, but it would still get a successful result at the end. So that sort of thing is really helpful when you're working with, for instance, web servers or user-facing servers that you want to expose through Kubernetes. I definitely think we should try that at some point, Nicole, and just
Yeah, I
see
still
how that.
intend to. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. um, I also want to try out different tools. So the tool that I used was XK6 Chaos for a few reasons. One, I have direct access to the guy that created it, who's Sime. So that's yeah, like that when you don't know what you're doing, like me, that was a big part of the appeal. Plus, I really like the idea of having a chaos user just in my load testing script. I don't know, maybe I'm just more familiar with working with a script, but I also like that I could, because of the scenarios in K6 and the stages, I could say at exactly this time I want you to start, because I also didn't want it to start immediately, right? Because my users would still be ramping up for the first 15 minutes. So it's not really that useful because the response times and the throughput are changing at that point anyway. So being able to schedule it in the same script that I had scheduled my other scenario, that's I think that's the way to go.
Yeah.
But it is still simplistic, right? You already said you have things you want to add to it. What are some other tools that I maybe can try out now?
Um, I definitely think you should give Chaos Toolkit a try. If nothing else, than that because it actually has a K6 adapter, so you'll still be able to use your load tests while doing Chaos there.
Oh, can you tell me about that? Because Chaos Toolkit just announced that, right?
Yeah.
That yeah, go
So
on.
Chaos Toolkit is a open source chaos engineering tool or solution, which really opens up a lot of possibilities for the community to add their own extensions, just as with XK6. Uh, so what I've done is that I've written a K6 extension that is available for anyone to use to sort of add load into your actual chaos experiment. And let's see if I can just find the. Here we go. So we have an extension called Chaos K6, which you can use as part of your Chaos Toolkit experiment to either induce load or to stress an endpoint or something like that. But you can also use it just as probes to make sure that, for instance, throughout the chaos experiment, you still want a certain number of users to be able to access your application, and you want them to get a successful response. So it's basically kind of the same thing that you're doing with XK6 Chaos, but with the difference that while XK6 Chaos or K6 in general is a imperative tool in the sense that you actually describe the control flow and what you want to happen, and you make it
Mm.
branch in case you have different conditions that are fulfilled or things like that. Chaos Toolkit, as with most other chaos engineering tools, is actually declarative. You don't really say that, okay, I want to try this first, and if that fails, do this. And you don't really uh, describe the control flow. You rather describe what you want it to do. So it's basically the question of what you want it to do versus how you want it to do it.
Hmm.
And coming from a testing background, or a software testing or developer in test background, uh, I
It's
really,
okay. You can be a tester.
I really like the idea of being able to control it the same way I would do with the rest of my code. I want to check
Hmm.
for certain conditions, and I want to branch out and take different routes depending on what happens in my application.
Mm.
So personally, I think the XK6 chaos approach caters more to what I want, which is
Yeah.
natural since I'm writing it. But it looks like the other tools like Chaos Toolkit, which I like as well, or Powerful Seal, which I know Daniel has been contributing to a bit, or a lot rather, or Litmus Chaos for that instance. They are all declarative. So they have other issues, but also other upsides than XK6 Chaos. So it's really a matter of taste. And I wouldn't say that there are any, silver bullet to this.
It's
Does that
also
make
that
sense, or am I just rambling?
no, it makes sense. For me, it was also just like you start talking about declarative versus imperative and whatnot, and I'm like, whoa, what am I going to have to learn for this? Like, it's just, I think it's so much easier that K6 is already in JavaScript. I'm still using K6. I'm just using a special build of K6 that has XK6 chaos built in. So for me, I still think this was just a really easy way to start. If maybe if Gremlin were more available, like if I had a free account that I could just play on, that was something that I thought was really cool too. And that is like the interface is just great. You feel like you have so many of these little tools at your disposal. You're just like, I wonder what that button does. They make it so easy. Have you ever used Gremlin before?
Yeah, I have, and I really like it as well. It's really polished, and it really caters to users that might not have a traditional programmer background or developer background, which I think is nice. In the same way that K6 Cloud allows you to build test using the test builder or even with the recorder, and you don't have to actually do any programming. But for me personally, coming from a programming background mainly, I really like that. I like having that control over what is happening. So for me, it's a little too easily available or whatever you would say. It caters to so many that it doesn't really fit me. But I really understand what they're going for, and I think it's great as well.
Yeah. So it sounds like with the Chaos Toolkit one that you're talking about, another difference would be that sounds more like you're running chaos experiments. Why don't you add in load testing rather than like the XK6 chaos approach, which is you have a load test. Why don't you add a little bit of chaos?
Yeah, definitely.
Which is a little easier to start with. I also want to plug this. I just put a link in the chat. Danielle's list of resources for tools that he would use for running chaos experiments and in different situations, like if whether an application is on Kubernetes or not, that kind of changes as well what tools you might use.
Awesome.
Yeah, so in general, I thought that I like my experience with chaos. I did. I mean, this is still just very basic stuff, right? This is still beginner things that I'm doing, but I did run experiments, and I did it with my load testing tool. This gets me so excited about what this is going to be like in the future, like a year from now. How much more will we be able to do just from the same tool that I'm already using anyway?
And you definitely gained infinite amounts of knowledge regarding chaos engineering as compared to what you had prior to doing
Yeah,
this,
from
right?
zero. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. It's a bit of a buzz term, I think. But really, I felt like the only difference was in load testing, the attitude is more about preventing outages, preventing high response times or bad user experience. And with chaos engineering, it was more like that's going to happen. Your application is going to fail. Let's examine the ways in which it could fail and how we could make it so that when it fails, it responds faster or better or more gracefully. So it might seem like a semantic difference, like it's such a small, nuanced difference. But I did feel like that was a significant enough difference to warrant a different way of thinking about chaos compared to testing.
Mm.
Does
And
that make sense? Do you think that too?
yeah, I agree with you, and I also try to stay clear most of the time from using the term chaos engineering, because I really think, as you say, it's very popular and there's a lot of hype around it. So if you
Mm-hmm.
can use terms like, say, reliability testing, or testing using a scientific method, or any of those
Yeah.
terms instead, I think you might uh, you might stay clear from a lot of the buzz that might otherwise uh, slow you down when you try to add value through this kind of testing. um, so definitely, I think the approach makes sense, and I think most testing practices, at least when it comes to the reliability and the infrastructure parts of testing, I think they will move towards this approach given enough time, because
Mm.
it just makes so much more sense than the traditional approach. Uh, so yeah, I definitely agree with you.
So I mean, it's always hard to do things live, right? I'm still like really nervous anytime I have to do anything live. But if you want to learn more about what I did, my experiences, there is going to be a much more condensed and concise version, and that's going to be in the New Relic Future Stack conference. I will put a link to that below so you can register. It's my talk is called Schrodinger's Pokemon, for reasons I'll explain in the talk itself. And I also wanted to plug Sima's talk. Sima, when are you talking? So I forgot to say my talk is next month, May 27th, but yours is actually sooner, right?
Yeah, I'm going to talk at the SLO Conf, which is hosted by the great folks at Noble 9. And SLO Conf is a conference that does not really concern itself as much with the actual practice of testing, or the experiments or whatever you do on your system or in your environment, but rather with how you measure them and how you follow up whether you are providing a reliable and consistent service to your users or your stakeholders. So the SLO Conf, I'll share my screen as well, is an online conference which you can participate in for free, and it's May 17th to May 20th. So it's really, really soon. And I will be talking a bit about, oh, sorry. I will be talking a bit about how you can use error budgets, or um, SLOs and SLIs, to measure whether you are successful in providing a reliable service, and especially how you can use them as part of a CI workflow, or a simulated uh, or a simulated time frame, or a simulated experiment, to really get a indication of whether you'd be able to stay within your error budget if this code that you're testing was live in production. So make sure you sign up for that. I think Nicole already put the link in the chat.
I
uh,
did.
and there's going to be a lot of excellent speakers plus me, so feel free to attend.
All right. I think that's it for this week. Thanks for listening. And I don't know about you, Sima, but I'm actually really ready to play Pokemon Snap. That's what I'm
Mm.
going to be doing right after this. So thanks, everyone, for listening. I guess we'll catch you all next week.
Yeah. Have a nice weekend.
Bye.